we have now arrived at the interesting part of the proceedings, which will allow interaction, question and answers, hopefully answers. We have 2 microphones in the passageways, and I'd like to ask attendees who wish to pose questions or make comments to just identify themselves and to indicate if there is a special panelist, they're addressing the questions to indicate that. And I look forward to a very interesting, as I said, session. Coming down here this morning, though, I looked up on the internet what technology, a definition, just for interest's sake, and it says the use. I mean, there were thousands, but the one that interested me was the use of science in problem solving. And I think, boy, we have a lot of problems, so there's definitely the need for technology, you know. The practical application and use of this knowledge. So I think we're definitely in the right field here, because as both Mr. Sinclair and Mr. Pinnock mentioned, Jamaica now needs growth. And I think technology is the avenue which we have to use to achieve this. So over to you now. Just indicate who you wish to address your questions to. Thank you.
I know it's a very small group, so don't all just jump up at once. I mean, I want to sort of try to get the debate going. It's a small group, but I love engaging no matter how many people are around, because like I said, that journey of 1 billion miles starts with the first step. So we're really talking about how you sort of motivate this cultural change towards technology implementation. And I think one of the things we're going to have to do is mandate some of it in the schools. Mandate that we move towards web-based school management systems for every school in order to get funding. When the American Embassy, and I see people like turning away, what? When the American Embassy instituted online registration, the only way to get a visa was to go online and register. Ligani still ram, right? I wasn't hearing any excuses about how we're going to finally engage. Once we were forced to get a visa by engaging online, didn't matter. Everybody got on board. And Ligani was ram. And it's still ram right now. So I don't think that there is any real impediment other than in our minds. And so, the issue is when I go through some of the issues that we are running up against, and I'm sure it doesn't apply to any of you teachers out there or administrators, certainly not, enlightened administrators like you, Mr. Reed, going forward. But when I hear some of the issues that arise, it don't have anything to do with resources either. When the resources are provided free of cost, right? What we're finding is, for instance, in the primary schools where we've tried to implement RenWeb, of the 15 schools, 1 is implementing it, even though it's free. 1 out of 15. So it's not a resource issue at all.
Yep. Morning, Gary, sure. And to the panel. I wanted to throw it out to maybe get the conversation going, that some schools, you talk to them or you mention RenWeb, and they will say something like, well, they'll make comments alluding to the digital divide, saying that their parents are not tech savvy. And so because they're not tech savvy, they perceive that, yes, if we take it on, that's one thing, but what about the parents now engaging the school online? It's going to be a problem in their nooks and crannies, necks of the woods to do that. That's the excuse that they'll find. You'll say that you are providing at Lime Flow internet into the most remote parts of the country, but they maintain that their parents who are not going to be able to cross over. That's one point. Another issue that I wanted to hear you on is in terms of, well, maybe not you, but the rest of the panelists, on moving towards cloud solutions, this whole question of cybersecurity and whether or not you're, making people feel safe, that their data is safe when they move to a cloud solution. I wanted to hear you on that, but also on this issue of bridging the digital divide and ensuring that the average parent can be comfortable to say, I can check online and engage a school in an online manner.
Right, so I'll just jump in there quickly to say that, again, the idea somehow that we're incapable of engaging in this way, I just find that tough to accept. When, like I said, it's mandated in other spheres of our lives, and everybody who needs to manages to engage. But when it comes to now your education and your child's education and the need to head down a particular path with respect to technological engagement, everybody has a bunch of excuses. I reject that. The idea there is to make it mandatory.
With the embassy, they go to an intermediary and say, book my interview and whatever. They go to an intermediary, but with a school situation, there's no intermediary. You have to do it. There's no,
Gary?
nowhere to take the heat off you.
Well, just to, I'm sorry. You want to go first?
Please go ahead.
Okay. Just to comment on that, no matter how much you mandate it or whatever you do, the problem goes back to leadership. Leadership in schools. You have good teachers, but a good teacher does not make a good principal. A principal has to be a chief executive officer for the schools. So in selecting principals, and you can look at the schools with strong leadership, and you can see the difference. And I point to JC, Mr. Reed, I point to Immaculate with Sister. You can see the difference. It boils down to leadership. Because, in fact, a lot of these projects fail because if you go to a school and say implement RenWeb, they're going to find the IT teacher or somebody and say, you go ahead and do it. It has to be driven from the top. And the starting point is not with the technology. The starting point is mapping your process. Before you can start engaging technology, the school needs to sit down and say, let me map the process, how a student passes through the school, how they get registered, how they go to class, how we do the timetable. When you have that mapped in a process flow, you are now ready to speak with the technology providers. You can say, this is what I want. They're not just going to show you that this is what you can do, and you switch to fit into this and that. At the end, your process must follow a logical pathway. And this is the first point you need to do. It has to be driven from top because 90% of the problem are cultural. As you rightly said, you offered it free to the primary school, one has implemented. So it has to do with leadership. Leadership from the level of the school board and from the level of the principal. If you don't drive it, because people like their own turfs. And they like the disjointed situation because it gives them power and comfort. I lock my drawer and nothing can happen until I come back because the school needs me. Nobody wants to be a part of the shared process. So I just say leadership is a strong point. And at the level of selecting principals, we need to look for chief education officers.
And just as a continuation, you mentioned that they would seek help in terms of going onto the visa site, right? Similarly, that's why we're here. Seminars like that like this that RenWeb is putting on to educate, to handhold the parents. And it's really for the schools who want to adopt it and they're hearing that as a concern, to bring the parents in, use the PTA body, establish classroom monitors who will identify those particular parents who have a challenge. And that's a good way to overcome that hurdle. But like any problem, it's around finding the solution so that you can take advantage of the benefit. And to your point, to the extent that the schools are leading the charge and they see the clear benefits to the school and to the parents, this is a good way to cross that hurdle. As it relates to managed security, cloud security, virtual services that you're accessing. The good news is that security is a key component of those services. We monitor best-in-class platforms. We look at your network. We ensure that your access is secure. And at the end of the day, that connectivity is direct to you. There's no invasion. We monitor our networks. It's a managed service. And therefore, it increases the confidence level and the risk of accessing and using the technology.
I actually have a little bit of experience in a very personal environment. A very good friend of mine, she's a teacher. And at her school, the policy was parents paid $2,000 a year, or they did so many hours of work at that school. And I worked with her to put in place a system that was cloud-based where the parents could report the hours that they did online through their web browser. Because up until that point, the school had been dealing with paperwork and phone calls in from parents saying, I volunteered for 2 hours at the library, or I did parking patrol, or I helped paint the soccer pitch. When we rolled out the new system, I was a little bit taken aback, but we did have some parents who said, I miss the old system. I want to be able to phone it into the secretary. I want to be able to write out a note and mail it into the school. And my friend, the teacher, came back to me and said, well, what should we do? And the principal, exactly to your point, sir, the principal said, we need to stand firm. We need to say, look, we no longer have time or money to spend answering phones or dealing with mail if you can do it through the web. So the school set up a laptop on the counter in the administrator's office, and teachers, or pardon me, parents who didn't have connectivity could come into the school and they could use that, or they could use the one at the library. But what it did was it forced the parents, in some cases, to kind of become familiar with that technology, and it forced them to engage more in their school, perhaps, than they had in the past. And it drove out that inefficiency. So I have seen some hesitation on the part of the parents, but it lasted about 90 days. And after 90 days, with some strong leadership and some process refinement, it was a thing of the past, and the school was able to retire that process. On the security front, those are always very good questions. Those are always very important questions. And this is where I say, again, to the leadership point, school administrators need to lead, just as in business, chief information officers need to lead inside the company. If school administrators don't say, these are the systems we use, these are the security policies we use, this is how we protect our network, if the school administration doesn't lead in that regard, what happens is security becomes an ad hoc process at the campus level, and different schools adopt different standards. And that doesn't work. But when school administrators say, we're using these systems, and here's the reason why, you instantly create an environment where there's good conversations around security, there's good conversations around encryption, and there's conversations that are centralized, there's accountability, and with accountability comes increased analysis and thoroughness. It terrifies me that some people think that paper floating around on the campus office is more secure than the systems that we have in place at this point. So my guidance, whether I'm talking to my commercial customers at the chief information officer level or academic officers who are working at the administration level, is it's important for you to lead, it's important for you to set out clear and well-articulated standards that everyone shall adhere to, and as soon as you do that, you eliminate vagueness, and you eliminate different standards, and you eliminate a situation where different teachers are using different systems to protect privacy and security, and you create a much more secure environment than you would ever have otherwise.
Totally agreed. I was passed a document just now on a smartphone, alluding to the idea that you'd mentioned earlier, that somehow the paper-based system is safer than the technology-based, cloud-based even systems. Look, as long as we don't, going back to the leadership issue, as long as we don't mandate that these systems be put in place, we're going to find all kinds of excuses to not implement them. As long as it's optional, it's going to be relegated to the schools where the leadership's strong, visionary, and take charge, and the vast majority of schools are going to get left behind. The only way to jumpstart the system, I hate to sound authoritarian, but the only way to jumpstart the implementation, the wide-scale implementation, is to mandate it. And say, if you can't keep up, then you're going to just get left behind. And trust me, just like you mentioned earlier, they go and find somebody else to help them with the visa system, they're going to find a way, everybody's going to have to find a way to get on board. But as long as you make it optional, it's going to be relegated to just those few schools, like Mr. Reed's and others, with the visionary leadership capable of leading it. And we're going to have this sort of educational apartheid system that exists, where a few schools and a few kids benefit from visionary leadership, and the vast majority of kids and schools get left behind. We have to mandate it. I don't want to sound authoritarian, but we have to mandate it and make it absolutely mandatory. That is the only way to jumpstart this, because this reason about safety, the other reason about parents, there are going to be a zillion excuses. A zillion excuses. We have to just implement it and make it mandatory, and people will find a way.
And the same leadership issue raised applies to businesses. The difference is that technology properly used improves efficiencies, reduce costs, right? And if a business doesn't adapt and stay with the times, the cost will be out of line and the business will close. So it's of necessity, normally, that businesses, as private sector businesses, have to change and adapt with the times. And I agree with what has been said in terms of leadership. If the CEO is not moving with the times, invariably, he won't be CEO very long, you know. And you'll find somebody who will move with the times.
Just to share a real-life example in implementing a web-based system. One of the first hiccup I had at the Caribbean Maritime Institute was from my senior managers. People who did not want to change. And I said, this is something that we are going to do, and there's no turning back. The next obstacle came from the IT department. Hey, I am managing all these software, you're going to go to cloud. What will happen to my job? I say, your job is going to change to something else. You're not going to get into because our role here, we're not just teaching people, we are offering an educational product. And you're going to get more involved in serving the customer as opposed to running behind hardware. We're going to leave a lot of that to the cloud. So I can tell you, it's a fight, it's a push through, and you have to be on the ground, you have to drive it. When you hear all the excuses about people, oh, we feel more comfortable with this, and then flow goes down one day. And oh, you see it, everything crash. I say, let it crash. Write down the thing, when it come back up, we go again. But you have to fight and push through. And believe me, it can be done. It's not easy changing a culture. It's not easy changing a culture. The least of the apostles is to fund it. It's harder changing the mind.
Right? Flow had about 500 staff. Lime, Cable and Wireless had about 600, 1,100 staff when you add them together. But bringing the two companies together, I am not going to be able to be left with 1,100 staff. That just is not going to happen. Shareholders and certainly senior management in Miami just not going to allow that to happen. They have said get the most efficient team on the field. The ability to manage through a process where people are going to be personally affected by the outcome is not easy. I agree. You're going to have to convince people, though, that don't look at what is about to occur as the glass being half empty. Look at it as an opportunity to become more and more relevant to a future environment. So whatever it was you were, whatever particular cog you were in the wheel that used to spin, you may need to upskill yourself and adapt to the way of the world. You don't believe that what you do today is what you are always going to do forever and ever more. You're relegating yourself to extinction there, right? My bio said I used to be in the investment banking business, for instance. I could have stayed a banker all of my life. I am now a telecoms guy because I have to reinvent everybody have to reinvent themselves. Don't look at the need to come outside your comfort zone as a negative. It's a positive. We should all look to adapt, change, and adjust.
Thank you. And I'd just like to add, Jamaica is where we are today because of the same very business. The change that needs to happen, for example, even to create a logistics center, the environment. We don't need so many ministries. But who is going to give up themselves? That's the reality. These are the tough questions that we have to face. And in fact, this is it. Who is going to go? And it's not about job security. This whole thing is happening at the very Ministry of Education. You have some schools with 40 teachers and 20 students. But the ministry cannot move them. that's unsustainable. We know this, and as a result of we see ourselves at the center of the picture, not the learners. This is why we are where we are. Let me just say this: change, you can't stop it. It was Kofi Annan who said, trying to stop globalization, trying to stop change is like trying to stop globalization. You cannot block it. Just the reality. And this is something that must come. As I'm happy you said, Mr. Sinclair, we have to reinvent ourselves. The skill sets that you have to offer were good filing skill sets that can be done online. You don't need that skill set anymore. What else can you do? It's time for a lot of people to go back to school, to learn new skill sets, to reinvent themselves, and let go of the institutions and stop holding them back. That's the reality.
One of the things that's interesting about IT departments specifically, because we used to hear a lot from IT staff concerned about how the cloud was going to take their jobs away. There's probably nowhere near enough IT staff working on the right things inside most organizations. Too many IT staff are spending time doing what we call break fix in the industry. They're installing security patches. They're making sure the lights are blinking. They're dealing with hard drives that failed. You know, inside your own organization, if some of your IT people are able to move from keeping lights blinking to generating management reports, or helping equip your field teams with better point of sale systems, or give the CEO and your staff better financial reports. Those are still IT jobs, but they're higher value IT jobs than babysitting computers. And in my experience, what I see when I work with companies and non-government agencies who are consolidating 50, 60, or 100 IT departments into cloud-based models, those IT staff, not as many of them go away as you think. What happens is they get to work on things that are more important to the mission and add more value to the executive team.
Okay, any more questions for the panel? We have this expert panel here. It's not very often you have these people to address any issues you may have. Mr. Reid, do you have anything? You're one of the leaders in the schools. I don't know. All right, well, it appears that we have covered all the burning issues.
Right,
Okay.
I was giving a mic. But one of the issues, I know some administrators like myself, while we are indeed sold on the technology, the issue, and it's a cultural issue, of how students abuse the technology. So as administrators, some of us are a little bit fearful of how students misuse the technology in school. That's one of the reasons also that some persons are very reticent in whole-scaling adopting technology in school. So cell phone is a problem in controlling. Phablets is a problem. Tablets is easier to control. And also, we prefer actually laptops because it's easier to control in terms of technology systems. So I don't know if the panel may want to address that. How can we better, as administrators, and I don't know if there are any apps. One thing we're trying to do at JC also is to develop an app to identify and control every device that students bring on your campus.
Yeah, let me just jump on that, Mr. Reid. Thank you. Excellent question. Abuse of the technology obviously is a topical issue, and something you're going to have to you're going to have to contend with the whole scale adoption of technology. But you're going to deal with that through there are technological means, obviously, for dealing with the access, certainly on your network, that you allow for people sort of matriculating the network you set up at your school. There are ways for ensuring that access is restricted to what you want. You can monitor that access through deep packet inspection and other tools that allow you to literally track the devices on your network and know what it is that they are accessing. So there are ways around the issues. But look, at the end of the day, that's not going to stop somebody from trying. And that you get around, the desire to misuse the technology, you get around through education. We'll get back to that word. You sort of make the process of using the technology to learn and grow so exciting, so engaging, that that's what the kids come onto your campus and want to do with it. So it's a process. Technologically, I think, and we will hear that there are ways to identify what it is kids are using the technology to do, and you can prescribe what it is that each kid is allowed to do. But what you have to deal with is the desire to abuse the technology, and that you have to just compete with their desire to abuse it by providing them with such an engaging experience on campus with the technology that's what they want to do.
All right. Just to add to that, there are two approaches. And one, we can take that penal approach. Or you can take the approach to pull out their passion. And when you can pull out their passion, you get a lot more out of them. For example, the shade between enjoyment, pleasure, and learning it's almost gone. So you cannot stop a lot of the little things that we used to think was pleasure. A lot of it now can be considered learning. For example, what's happening in the whole telecoms world. Now with number portability, the network between Lime and Digicel to say whose number is this, you're going to have a big problem. To try to track, you have to come to one price per call. That's where you're being forced to, because that identification is going to get a little bit more difficult. And in other words, the more you engage students, I find, is the more you get out of them. For example, I see a lot of males come to the Caribbean Maritime Institute because we use a lot of simulation in our training. And boys that were disengaged, you now see them engaged, because you can now get into virtual reality. You're touching something, you're learning, you can move this, you can see the impact, as opposed to sit in a classroom, chalk and talk. And my fellow panelists made a very powerful point about the cell phones. If we were to engage the cell phones in school and try to get more, you'll be surprised, we pull out the creativity out of them. Because a lot of what they see, okay, this is not fun because I can't use my phone. When you can use your phone and it becomes fun, you can get a lot more out of them. So I think if we change the approach and put more responsibility on them and hold them to that responsibility, I think we'll get a lot more. So the learning environment has to change from one of just being a penal approach to one to more encourage them to learn, and they want to learn. Because most of this learning actually takes place outside of the classroom.
All very well, good points. And just to say, it's a combination of approaches with anything in life. So it's a combination of management, which is critical. So for instance, we offer what is called mobile workforce. It really is about, in an environment like this where people are bringing their own devices, we provide the analytics which says somebody is on for 2 to 3 hours, the likelihood of them being in one class and connected to one site, kick them off the network. So it's about management. And the analytics includes, for example, what are the sites that they're accessing, how long they're accessing, who is accessing, where they're accessing in terms of where we put access points for the Wi-Fi and so on. So these are analytical tools that we provide with our services to help you to be more diagnostic, to help determine where you have additional requirements, and in terms of managing the usage levels. In addition to that, think about it. If indeed you use the devices that they bring, they're more comfortable with it, they have their apps. But again, use it in a more exciting way, a more fun-filled way. Again, at the end of the day, you know how it is a little bit of a pride thing to be able to bring out the phone and show what they can do, and to be able to access information and demonstrate to everybody else, because it's always a competition, yeah? And these are the things that motivate them, and we use that motivation in terms of research, assignments, information, then the benefits are clear. And then access the technology tools that we have available to help you manage your infrastructure, the usage thereof. I'll never forget, we outfitted a particular corporation with exactly that. Employees were encouraged to bring their own devices. In meetings, you have to multitask, focus on the meeting, but still get the job done. So, of course, it was an important meeting of all the senior management. And at the end of the meeting, the CEO got a report from IT, which was emailed to him, which said, 3 of the senior managers were busy watching YouTube and shopping online. The other 4 were actually responding to emails on the job. And the other 2 were just surfing the net. They're in a meeting making critical decisions. So the CEO was able to reprimand which was important for the ones who were watching YouTube and not focusing on the meeting or doing work clearly, but also to motivate and incentivize those that were actually multitasking, using the infrastructure and the tools. Also, in terms of the technology solutions, accessing information securely, which is one of the other points you raised. And again, what we're providing is access to the school's syllabus, e-books, any material that the school is putting out in a safe and secure environment using password protection, firewalls, and so on, so that students can actually access the information that you want them to access, and then you can monitor such access as well.
Remember also, the modern day generation learn differently from us, We could only do one thing at a time. They're watching the TV, they're working on the phone, they're working on a laptop, and they're doing everything at the same time. They have multiple intelligences. So we have to understand, we have to cater to these type of learners. So they can be there, and they are learning, and you think they're not learning. But they are learning because sometimes they may be engaged in doing something else to reinforce or to connect with what they're doing, probably just talking to their friends or whatever. But we deem this as distraction, and technology is really disruptive. So how are we going to think the future? We have to look at it differently.
Okay, any other questions for the panel?
Mr. Wayne Robinson just arrived. I'm sure he has a question.
I didn't get that. I didn't get that, Mr. Reed. What?
Mr. Wayne Robinson of Quality Academics has just arrived over there. I'm sure he has a question.
Can you go to the mic in the aisle? Yeah, we're off to.
Morning, panelists. First, I apologize for coming in late, but I first want to commend all our players in ensuring that we have a different school system this year, especially with the use of technology. And changes in what is happening in the world and changes in our education system. I'm seeing very big players there. I want to commend RenWeb as well, because we've been using this system for the last 2 years, and we've found that all the attributes of the system work for our students. And I don't think we're using, if you ask me, it's like me using my cell phone, I think I'm using about 100th of the capability of the system. It's where it is. It is what we have to do now at all schools, not just private schools, but public schools, to ensure that the delivery of the service is good, that parents can keep in touch and communicate with all the things that we have to do as teachers and educators, and that students can keep in touch also using the system. I think it's the best, certainly the best local one I've seen. And it has been good for us at Quality. So mine is not really a question so much like a testimonial to what we have experienced over the year from it. And private sector support, as I see a couple of private sector people here, private sector support is extremely important, because if you don't give us the tools and equip us in the education system with the tools that we can make the system better, it's not going to happen. So it's good to see Flo, and it's good to see Berger, it's good to see Fitz. If we don't have your support, guys, please don't forget us private schools. We are a part of the system. I'm sure most of you send your children to prep schools, and that's no indictment against the primary system. I'm just saying, don't forget us when we have access for students on the internet. Please don't forget private schools, because we are Jamaica's children too. Mr. Reedy put me on the spot, but I had to put in that plug. Again, gentlemen, please, and lady, thanks. I think the system is excellent, and if we all move forward with this local system, with the support that we get internationally, we should see some better things over the next 2 to 3 years.
Okay, sir, thanks for those comments. Time is upon us. We'll reach our cutoff time. I don't know if they... Huh? Oh, you want it? Go ahead.
I'm not too sure if this mic. Is this working?
Go ahead.
Is it working? Okay, good. I have one question to ask to Mr. Downing, Craig Downing, because one of the reasons
Speaking to Mike.
I said I have one question to ask Mr. Downing, because one of the reasons why we wanted to integrate our system, our Red Web system, with an accounting system, because one of the challenges the schools are having is poor accounting because they're not using technology. We have implemented a system called Z Michaela portal that integrates the accounting system with RenWeb. I would like Mr. Downing to speak on what does the Epicor system have to offer within the cloud-based system that schools can benefit from that sort of a technology in itself.
Sure. Yeah, just briefly. So Epicor is enterprise management software, and that's an fancy way of saying really the accounting system that drives governments and businesses and indeed many schools. What we're working with RenWeb and with Zed Michaela to do is put in place cloud-based financials that will provide the system of record for all of the schools. One of the things that I briefly alluded to in my conversation, but one of the things that I believe very strongly is that you don't want an environment where every school has their own accounting system and accounting standards and accounting reports, because it creates a tremendous amount of inefficiency and it's difficult to do comparative analysis. If this was an industry, and I said to a CFO, every one of your divisions around the globe is using its own accounting system and its own fiscal calendar and has their own accounting practices, she would have a fit, because she wants, as the chief financial officer, the ability to compare how much they're paying for a commodity good in Kingston versus Montego Bay versus Ocho Rios versus Miami versus somewhere in China. So what we want to do is we want to create an environment where very cost effectively and without burdening any of the IT resources that are currently in place, we can create an environment where administrators have the ability to look across the best performing schools and say to the leadership in that school, how have you brought so much more money to the classroom? How are you able to spend X dollars per student when a school that has the similar budget as you is only able to do 75 or 65% of that money going into the classroom? And by having a standard-based financial management system, just as we like in industry, because it allows us to analyze performance on a plant-by-plant basis or a country-by-country basis, it's going to allow us to have a very cost-effective means to share best practices across schools and allow principals and administrators to say, hey, this is interesting. Here's a much less expensive vendor servicing this school than you have providing the same service here. So we think that by moving to the cloud and by creating a standards-based financial management environment, administrators, government agencies, parents are all going to have much better transparency as to how that money is being spent, and principals and on-campus leaders are going to be able to share best practices with each other, because they'll have the same system and they'll be able to share reports and compare one another's dashboards. So we, in our experience, we've been able to drive a tremendous amount of inefficiency out of commercial organizations doing this exact same thing. And we're excited to be working with Zed Michaela to drive that same efficiency into the RenWeb school system.
Okay, before wrapping up, I just ask if any of the panelists has a last word for this forum. So Sinclair, anything?
Well, yeah, I just want to say how pleased I am to be part of a process like this. Again, the size doesn't matter to me. I think we need to engage one at a time, 10 at a time, 100 at a time, because one will tell 10 friends, 10 will tell 100 friends, and so on. But the idea is we need to move down this path, one foot in front of the other, in order to get all of the things we say we want for our society. Economies that grow, a civil society that treats one another civilly and don't settle disputes with cutlass and knives. And this is the way we do that. It starts here. It starts with every one of you educating and developing young hearts and minds in the way that they're developed everywhere else in the civilized world. And to the extent that the company I work for, both myself and Nadine work for, can facilitate that process, we're going to be there. We're going to lobby like crazy to continue to invest the capex required to provide free or close to free internet access, tablets and computers in schools, because we know the benefit it's going to have, like I said, on our economy and growth and creating the civil society we say we want. So I am willing, able, and always available to present and interact at forums like these in order to positively affect the impact of technology on education. And it was a pleasure to be here amongst all of you here today, the few of you here who have stuck around to be engaged. I applaud you, and I'm always going to be available to be part of that process as long as you'll have me.
Thank you. Nadine, you?
I endorse everything that Gary just said, and that's why we're here. You know, both of us here. Certainly from where I sit, we have a relationship with RenWeb, but we also have a relationship with the schools, and this is what it's about, relationship. And I said earlier, it starts with you. You don't need to wait on your principals or your CEOs. Demand it, ask for it, push for it, encourage others around you who are using it. And if there's any way that we can help, call us. If we can't, then maybe we know somebody who can. Thank you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank the panel, again, the panelists, and to thank you all for participating this morning. I hope you learned something or reinforced what you had previously learned, but I certainly found it informative. And